I know. I mean, I remember that was like an ongoing meme. I mean, I've been in it since 2017, but it was like ETFs right around the corner, ETFs right around the corner. And now that it's here, I think it's blowing people's expectations away, even despite the anticipation around them. Um, but one of the
Mm.
things that I've thought about with those ETFs is it's actually a blessing that they were denied for so long, because it allowed more Bitcoin to be distributed, less, I guess, centralization risk of a majority of the Bitcoin supply being hoarded. If an ETF was launched in 2013 when Bitcoin was still very young and the block reward was still much higher, perhaps we would have had more centralization. Do you have any thoughts about that? About whether it was a blessing or not that they were denied for so long?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I'm not an expert in market formation, right? I think that certainly it did, it has contributed to this idea that Bitcoin is currently mainstreaming, and it does feel like a validation. I'm still, I would say, skeptical of the ETFs. I do think that it is very interesting to see that there is such a community support for the ETFs, given that they, essentially, in many ways kind of contradict a lot of the things that we have preached, right? As kind of Bitcoin only, Bitcoin maximalists, right? We've really wanted to prioritize self-custody. We really wanted to get Bitcoin, people to adopt Bitcoin and actually join the network, right? And actually be participants in it. And the ETF kind of runs in contrast to that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still looking at what's going on with BlackRock, and I'm sympathetic to the set of Bitcoiners that are a little bit worried about this, right?
Yeah.
It is a increasingly large amount of Bitcoin is in the hands of institutions that are easily regulatorily captured. It's unclear what their motivations and intentions in these products are. I mean, it's currently my thesis that this isn't the last like crypto related ETF. I mean, I can't believe that BlackRock is seeing this demand and is not lining up ETF 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 that is going to repackage and continue to push these type of products now that they've seen that demand. You've seen Larry Fink talk about tokenization and use some sort of the crypto industry's kind of standard dialogue to discuss what he's doing with the Bitcoin ETF. So yeah, I still remain pretty skeptical of what's going on Wall Street and with the institutions. I mean, obviously it's great that they're dipping their foot in, but I don't think we should confuse that with them sort of agreeing completely with our ideology, because I think, the Bitcoin ideology, at least going back to Satoshi and, his intent, it really was to undermine, the entirety of the structure that, BlackRock and other Wall Street groups essentially benefit from, are a part of. So I don't think that we've seen the last of that. And if anything, I think the higher the price, the sooner we might head to a tension point like this, because essentially, you got to look at the fundamentals, right? It's like, what does Wall Street kind of change here for the whole calculus of, we're trying to move the financial system and the monetary system of the world over to this new network. Some of us, right? I don't know. Again, it's hard to tell what's controversial these days. That's our goal. Is that Larry Flink's goal? Is that BlackRock's goal? I can't imagine, but I'm waiting to be surprised.
Yeah, I know. I mean, obviously, working at Swan, I mean, we always try to educate people about why self custody has its advantages over a Bitcoin ETF. I guess I'd like to think about it a little more optimistic in terms of it being kind of a top of funnel for people to gain exposure to it, just ease of access, convenience for them to gain exposure. But then as they own some, they start to learn about it. Then they realize, oh, I'd actually want to hold this in a sovereign way, the way that it was meant to be held. That's my hope, at least. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? Because I think you're right. I mean, these people are going to want to make money. They want to see their AUM increase over time so that they can collect more money on the fees. They're not incentivized for people to take self-custody. But my hope is that more and more clients will start to understand it once they learn about it, once they own exposure to the price. They'll want to own the real
Oh,
thing.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, look, you got to start somewhere, and anything is, I think any exposure to Bitcoin is ultimately good. However, you want to evangelize in your own life. I think I'm just saying there's been a tendency, I think, to kind of misconstrue like their acceptance and the popularity of the ETF with the validation of, I would say it's sort of the Bitcoin maximalist type of ideology, right? So essentially, this idea that Bitcoin is, a monetary invention. It's essentially, this new type of monetary network that we've never seen before, and that we can build, the entirety of the kind of financial structures off of, or, our best attempt. So I think that, if you think about what that ideology is, and going back to these Satoshi emails, what do we see? We see somebody who is, very concerned about, making a network that can avoid the type of issues that have historically been involved with the government management of money, right? Satoshi makes direct appeals both with the kind of Genesis inscription and the blockchain, with the no more bailouts for banks, but really does talk about, and there's a great new quote in here about him, this is a great money if people want to take it up, right? He talks about kind of this grassroots adoption of this money that's outside the existing system. So again, I think that to me, that's the meta narrative, right? Like Bitcoin is the story of a single person's invention, right? He invented and he did something great where many other people failed. And the interesting thing with inventions is, it's kind of funny. I wrote this in one of my early pieces. I have this piece called The Last Days of Satoshi, but it's kind of a deeper look into Satoshi's kind of history and involvement in the project. But, to be an inventor, it isn't really just good enough for you to invent something. There's a couple of second layers to that, which is like kind of funny if you think about it. Like you also have to evangelize for it, right? I said like Satoshi had like the double curse of every great inventor, which is not only did he have to invent something new, right? You think about Albert Bell or Albert Einstein. People, not only do they have to kind of teach the world something new as possible, not only do they have to invent it and prove that it's mathematically practically true, they have to convince other people, right? They actually have to convince the people that the world has changed. That was the verbiage that I use. It's not only do you have to change the world, you have to convince the world that it has changed. And then I think, in an invention that is kind of at the scale of Bitcoin, then those kind of followers have to go forth and then they have to bring about that change, like in a lot of ways, right? Like, the people who invented electricity, I mean, they had to go forth into the world and string it with wires and like bury cables under the sea. And they had to like string them from poles from sea to sea, right? Like there was this tremendous like idea of like, if you think about the electrical grid, like as a network, like what a tremendous human undertaking that was. And, we don't really focus on that part of the story. I'm sure there are books about like the history of electrical grids and just, electricity in general. But, we're left today with Tesla and Edison and their kind of duel. And that's, what we have inherited from this. But really, it's like the human story of that was a lot broader and a lot more. It took a lot more time, right? Again, it wasn't just this person invented something. There was all these second, third order effects. And I think we're into those second, third orders effects. And it's, we have to be mindful that it's going to take time, but that also, I'm sure that like Edison, I don't know who would have been the incumbent industry, the candle makers,
the
I
candle
guess,
makers were probably pretty pissed off.
Like weren't super excited that like he made the light bulb, right? I'm sure we don't like know. They weren't tweeting at the time, so we don't know. But I'm sure there would have been the no electricity people would have been like a whole subset of like past Twitter, right, where they were just super bullish on candles. Candles were gonna, you can't take the whaling industry out. We need whale blubber.
Well, they were afraid of the new technology, right? Too electricity. It was basically the beginning, the early years. Right. You're just trying to convince people, like, look at this. Like, I have light. It's night.
I mean, it's legitimately, like, I mean, if you focus on like what is actually happening, where it's like, yeah, you're actually like piping electrical current like through your house, like at a pretty tremendous scale, right? I just had a kid like over the last year, she's taking her fingers and like light switches left and right, it's like, okay, well, I'm sure like it would have been easy to be concerned about something like this, but now we just we don't even notice it. Like you wouldn't even think twice. So like there could be a half exposed electrical circuit in your room and you would just never know.
I think you make a great point about it just takes time to bring people to the cause to understand the new invention, but then also want to build on it, right? Entrepreneurs to come in and build the systems that are required and the infrastructure that's required to actually make the invention worthwhile for society. And I think we see that in Bitcoin right now. It reminds me of Andreas Antonopoulos talks about this too with the automobile, right? The automobile in the beginning, there wasn't like roads, gas stations, you needed all this infrastructure in order to make the automobile what it is today. Maybe we're at the same stage right now with Bitcoin. We're kind of coming out of that early stage where we had to basically evangelize for its purpose and just teach people about what it is. But now we have to build the infrastructure. We are building the infrastructure.
Well, I think one more point I would make on that is I think we are at a little bit more of a saturation point on this, right? Because I think that if you think about the modern world, right, there's no more West, right? There's nowhere else for you to go if you have a new idea that you really want to establish. And I think back then it's like, sure, there were no roads, Sure, there was no gas stations, but there was plenty of room to build them. I think one of the interesting things with Bitcoin is it comes at a time when, like, the global populace is 8 to 10 times larger, and it does feel saturated, right? So where do you build the new thing? Sure, you're building it in cyberspace, but there's the physical imprint on it. And I think, if you look at now the anti-technology movements, you look at like the people who are anti-mining, right, or what are they objecting to? They're sort of objecting to like reusing these existing resources. They're saying these things exist in a certain way, and it's harder to just like build them new, right? Like to build a new Bitcoin mine, you need a lot of space, right? Like you need a place like Texas that's accommodating. But I think there's an interesting thing where it's like Bitcoin is at a time when the world feels very developed, and it feels like new ideas have a harder time. Like so it'll be interesting to see if that tension kind of persists. I don't have a great handle on that. But
yeah, the digital frontier that we're looking upon, and Bitcoin kind of stands on that.